All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating paper by Dr. Sadık Temizel, and it makes a pretty wild claim that major historical events, we're talking everything from ancient conquest to modern crises, are actually numerically encoded right inside the verses of the Quran.
I mean, think about that for a second. Could the year 1914 really be hidden inside a book that's over 1,400 years old? It sounds like something out of a movie, right? But that's the central question, the big hook of the paper we're unpacking today.
So here's the basic idea. The paper argues that the Quran isn't just a source of spiritual guidance. It's also, in a way, an encrypted historical timeline. It points to huge events that wouldn't happen for centuries after it was revealed. And the key to unlocking all of this, the author says, is a very old system of numerology. And that, of course, brings us to the big how. How could that even be possible? Well, this whole theory hangs on an ancient system called Abjad. It's a method that treats letters not just as, parts of a word, but as numbers.
Okay, so what is Abjad? Put simply, it's a system where every single letter in the Arabic alphabet has its own unique number assigned to it. This means any word, any phrase, has a total numerical value. You just add up the letters. It's almost like a secret decoder ring built into the language itself.
And the system itself is actually pretty straightforward. You can see here the first letter, Aleph, equals 1, Ba is 2, Jim is 3, and so on. So by adding these up, a phrase like a beautiful town can be boiled down to a single number. And this is where it gets crazy. According to the paper, that number often matches up perfectly with a specific year in history.
But hold on. You're probably thinking, why would anyone apply a number system to a sacred text like the Quran in the first place? That is a totally fair question. The paper actually sees this coming and lays out a few reasons to justify the whole approach. Let's walk through that. So, the author really builds this case on four main pillars. First, this isn't some new idea. Arab poets have used Abjad for centuries to embed dates in their poetry. Second, there's a story where the Prophet Muhammad himself apparently didn't reject its use. Third, it's been used by some very well-respected Islamic scholars. And finally, the Quran itself seems to hint at it.
And this verse right here is a perfect example of that last point. The paper suggests that when the Quran talks about a clear book where everything is recorded, maybe it's not just talking about some heavenly record. Maybe it's talking about the Quran itself as a kind of all-encompassing coded book. Okay, so we've got the method and the justification for it. Now let's get to the good stuff, the actual evidence from the paper. This is where we see the theory in action with some pretty mind-blowing historical examples. Our first example comes from this really short phrase in the 34th chapter of the Quran. On the surface, it just seems like a simple, nice description. But when you run it through the Abjad system, you get a very, very specific number. And that number is 1453. Now, if you're a history buff, that year should be setting off all sorts of bells. It is one of the most pivotal dates in world history. And there you have it. The paper draws a direct line from the phrase, a beautiful town, to the year 1453, the conquest of Istanbul. The argument is that this was a hidden prophecy of that massive event. Now let's jump forward to a more modern example. For this next one, the paper looks at a verse that talks about corruption and bloodshed. And from this passage, it zooms in on one specific phrase for its calculation, the one who created corruption on earth. The Abjad calculation for this phrase, according to the paper, gives us the Islamic Hijri year 1332. And when you convert that to the Gregorian calendar we use, you get 1914, another date that should sound very familiar.
So the interpretation here is that this phrase about corruption on earth points directly to the start of the Great War, World War I, a conflict that, let's be honest, absolutely redefined what bloodshed could mean on a global scale.
Okay. For our last example, we're jumping right into our own lifetime. The paper looks at this verse, which is talking about rules for people who are sick, and the specific part it focuses on is whoever among you is sick. The calculation points to the Hijri year 1441, and in our calendar, that corresponds to the year 2020, a year that I don't think any of us are going to forget anytime soon. And this is maybe the paper's boldest claim, that a verse about sickness seems to contain the exact starting year of the COVID-19 pandemic, an event that literally shut down the entire planet.
Now, before we all get carried away, the author makes one thing very clear. This is not as simple as just plugging words into a calculator and getting a magic number.
There's a whole set of complex rules and a specific theological framework that this entire praxis is built on.
And this is absolutely key. These findings are framed within something called ishari tafsir, or suggestive interpretation. Think of it as a secondary layer of meaning that can't contradict the main, obvious one. And most importantly, you don't have to believe it. It's offered up for you to consider, not as a core part of the faith.
And this is where it gets really complex. The method has a lot of flexibility. As the paper points out, things like whether you count a doubled letter once or twice, how you handle certain vowel markings, or even which specific words you choose to include in your calculation, all of these things can completely change the final number. Which means one phrase could point to several different dates.
And that's exactly why the author stresses that this isn't just some mechanical process you can do at home. It's presented as a highly specialized field that requires a deep knowledge of the language, the text, and even a kind of spiritual insight to pick the right phrases and the right calculation methods.
So what's the big takeaway here? What we've looked at today is a framework for reading a sacred text through a mathematical lens. It's an argument that there are hidden layers of meaning and that history itself might just be woven into the very fabric of the verses.
Which leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? Are these connections proof of a divine pattern, a plan written in the stars? Are they just interesting coincidences discovered through a flexible system? Or is it something else entirely? It really makes you wonder. What does it mean when we find what looks like hard data hiding in a text of pure faith?